Hi, welcome back to the club room with Outlaw Bookseller. Here we are, things gradually getting back to normal. So this is the proper full member video for this week. There was the little one about Chelsea Quinn Yarborough yesterday. I shot it yesterday. Am I going to put this up the next day? Possibly, because I want to treat you for all the sort of wonderful care you showered me with and sent my way while I was sick last week. And getting back on schedule, and later this week on the regular channel I hope to have something sort of fairly spectacular. We'll see, we'll have to see how that comes out. I haven't quite scheduled that in yet. So if you're new to the club room, welcome aboard. You're probably thinking, what's all this informal stuff? Well, that's how we do things here. Today we're going to talk about some Philip K. Dick, and I've wanted to do this for quite some time, and what I was initially going to do was a really sort of in-depth analysis of the first chapter of the classic novel Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? This is my first copy, which I bought way back in late 76, early 77, and this is another earlier Panther copy here. And for reference, this time I did some rereading. I've read this book so many times. I used to read it and read it as a teen, that I got my Gollancz 50th anniversary edition out, which is really nice, and I don't think I'd ever want another hardcover one. It's got really nice type and things in it. As you can see, I'm being sprayed by Ubik there as well, so we should be okay. And the desire to do this now came out of an anecdote which I'm going to tell you in a moment. So my original plan to do an in-depth analysis of the first chapter sort of changed focus really, and I'm just hoping you can hear me, because this microphone, I might just do an adjustment. This is like Scott Bradfield's channel, isn't it? We're sort of making it as we go along, because we got the Dali scarf on, which is very handsome, but the old microphones tend to rotate and mess around. So anyway, back to what we were saying. It was something which happened to me only a couple of days ago. I was in work and I was sort of selling books. This was on Saturday, and I had a conversation with two different people who were buying books, and there was a lady buying a copy of Androids, and she was also buying a copy of Philip K. Dick's. So I'm going to put this somewhere else because it's beginning to really get to me. So let's just get rid of this, because I want to be certain that you're hearing what I have to say. I'll just clip that on there, and it might look a little bit intrusive, but you know, we are jacked into the system, as they say. Yeah, so I was selling a couple of PKD books to this lady, and she was buying Androids, and she was buying the collected short stories volume 1, and I've been rereading some of the short stories recently because I'm doing this thing later this month with Richard Rempel at Vintage SF, Ira at SF Words of Wonder, and Matt Defoe at Science Fiction Reads. We're doing a 4-way talking about the Del Rey book, The Best of Philip K. Dick, and I don't know where I put it. Richard sent me a copy and I can't find it. Of course, I've got all the stories in other volumes anyway, so I'm okay, and I've reread some of them. And I made the comment to this lady that, you know, when she bought volume 2 of the collected, an interesting thing was that all the stories in volume 2 were from 1 year. I think it was 55, I can't remember, but the entire sort of collection, and it's a big chunky tome, he wrote them all in the same year, which is incredible, you know, and considering that loads are made into films. And I mentioned, you know, how incredible he was, you know, that he wrote 50 books, he died at 52, was married 5 times, and there are all these film versions, you know, of Androids, Total Recall, Minority Report, Screamers, or Second Variety as we know it, Paycheck, Imposter, Scanner Darkly, Radio Free Albemuth. You know, and there was a younger lady sort of behind her, and she sort of interjected, you know, because I was saying how great I thought Philip K. Dick was. She said, oh, you know, I think Brandon Sanderson is better. Well, you know, Brandon Sanderson's a different genre, it's not really comparable. I think Brandon Sanderson, for all his success, is kind of making hay while the sun shines, you know, pumping the books out, rather like Adrian Tchaikovsky is doing as well. And, you know, I said, you know, well, you know, it is what it is, just a different thing. And she said, you know, don't get me wrong, I like Philip K. Dick's world building, but I don't like how he wrote about women. And this is sort of a moment which I would describe as knee-jerking. She fell into a reaction posture, and that phrase, reaction posture, is in Androids, and that was where I first came across it. And of course, a lot of the things in Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep centre around empathy and the Voight-Kampff empathy test, which Rick Deckard, the Bladerunner, uses to identify whether people he comes across are androids or human. Now, there are going to be some spoilers in this, so if you haven't read Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, you might want to sort of wait a bit. If you have, I hope you get something out of it. But if you haven't, they're more spoilers about tone and message rather than a lot of plot specifics. So I think it might enhance what you've got to sort of discover, because it's a book which is full of detail despite it being very short. So maybe you'll get through it anyway. So I really thought that this young lady was going to a reaction posture which was socially inspired, conventional, but logically flawed as a response, because you can't really take the response of fictional male characters to female ones as a definite indicator of an author's attitude to women. You know, on this basis, then an author is legion, displaying many different characters' foibles, many different characters with different attitudes towards the world and different actions. So how can they all represent the view of one author? As I say, the author maybe is legion, they are many. So especially in a third-person omniscient narrative like Androids, I think that's a very fallacious assumption to make, I would say. But anyway, the lady bought a copy of the World Fantasy Award-winning novel Perfume by Patrick Suskind, which came out in the late 80s, which is a Penguin Modern Classic in the UK. Most people don't realise it won the World Fantasy Award, but that's in the days when the World Fantasy Award was incredibly diverse and all sorts of books used to win it. And I was saying to her, you know, the people in Dick's books are fictional characters. They're not real people displaying definitive attitudes. And this reminded me of something which my friend Tom Toner, the SF writer, experienced. He had a thing when he wrote his Amaranthine Spectrum trilogy, where there was sort of certain brickbats online, and there was somebody who said, oh, you know, are you homophobic? Because one of the characters in the book was homophobic, and this character was obviously a bad guy and got his comeuppance in the end. But they were kind of assuming or questioning whether Tom was homophobic because this character was. And again, it brings up the thing of legion. You know, it's like, you know, how can you tell if an author's characters or which one of them is a mouthpiece of the author? You can't. But I decided to look at Androids with this sort of assertion in mind, with this reaction posture in mind, that Dick didn't write about women very favourably. Well, you know, if there is sexism in Androids, we can only tag it on to Rick Deckard, not Philip K. Dick, because Deckard is a fictional character and he's the focus of the piece. And also, the women in the novel, apart from Iran, Rick Deckard's wife, are not actually women at all. They're androids. There are a couple of walk-on parts of the secretaries in the police department where Deckard works, and yeah, they're not exactly that possibly displayed, though later in the novel they are. We see both sides of them because people are multifaceted. But the women, apart from Iran and those secretaries, are not women. They're robots, they're androids. They're not real. Now, in this edition of Androids, there's an introduction by Paul McCauley, which is really, really good. Paul McCauley's the sort of hard SF author I don't associate with a writer like Dick, but he does a great little introduction. And he talks about Dick's paranoia and his beliefs about the universe. And this is a quotation from Dick's essay, Man, Android and Machine. Within the universe, there exist fierce, cold things, which I have given the name machines to. Their behaviour frightens me, especially when it imitates human behaviour so well that I get the uncomfortable feeling that these things are trying to pass themselves off as human, but are not. I call them androids. Sly and cruel entities which smile as they reach out to shake hands. But their handshake is the grip of death, and their smile has the coldness of the grave. Dick was pretty unequivocal in getting across that in his fiction, when he used machines, robots, constructs, and things pop up again. You know, he had the concept in Autofac, and it also pops up in Second Variety, and it's mentioned actually in Androids of automated factories creating the androids. This was a recurrent theme in his work from the 50s onwards. Dick was paranoid and he was always wondering if something was out to get him, but he's very clear on this in his non-fiction writing, that his depiction of these ersatz entities, androids, robots, what have you, they're not meant to be empathic representations of human beings. They're killing machines, and there's no ambiguity about that. And you get that it's different in the film. You get the more touchy-feely approach, the androids of Bladerunner, such as Rachel, and in the final cut version, the most familiar versions, Deckard himself is revealed possibly or probably to be one of the Nexus 6. So the androids in the novel are killing machines without empathy, and Dick is very, very clear about this. I can't emphasize this enough. So my feeling is very much that if we want to divine Philip K. Dick's attitude to women, perhaps we should look behind Deckard to the bigger narrative and the bigger messages which come through in androids. Now, Deckard's wife, Iran, appears in chapter 1 and also at the end of the novel and intermittently throughout. And, she is a major force in that opening novel. And of course, it's a wonderful opening which begins with Deckard awakened by his Penfield mood organ, a device which stimulates electrical activity in the brain, named after a guy called Penfield, who discovered that the brain could be electrically stimulated. And everybody has a Penfield mood organ, or so they seem to, at least the Deckards do, because of the terrible depression of living in World War Terminus, so after World War Terminus, because the world has been destroyed by nuclear war and it's depopulated. People are going off to Mars or the colonies. Radiation is affecting people. Loads of animals have become extinct. So it is a dystopian post-nuclear world that they're living in. And the opening novel is typical of a Dick opening, where a man who's ground down in a low-level job is bickering with his wife. They have a domestic argument. And when I first read this at 13 or 14, whatever I was, it was so realistic and seemed so sophisticated compared to the things I'd read in writers like Heinlein, Asimov, what have you. And it really did seem to be serious literature, and I was really struck by this, and it's stayed with me ever since. But of course, the Penfield mood organ is kind of a metaphor. The book was written in 66 and published in 69. And at that point, of course, throughout the 60s, women on both sides of the Atlantic and in the Western world were increasingly feeling depressed at home in their consumer paradise while their husbands went out to work. And, they became addicted to tranquilizers. And you see a story like Pamela Zolin's The Heat Death of the Universe from New Worlds, where a woman is gradually going nuts because everything around her is decaying, or her internal state, her alienated Ballardian state, is reflected in the chaos she sees in domesticity. And of course, this is the thing. These are crutches, people using crutches in the sort of consumerist post-nuclear world. So both Deckard and Iran are in an artificially induced state of consciousness. It's not a normal place to be. So one thing that comes across in the novel as well is guilt. Guilt is central. Everybody is feeling bad after World War Terminus because of the animal extinctions. And the big social pressure, of course, is to have an animal, to care for an animal. And it's just added briefly in the book that at one point immediately after the war, if you weren't looking after a living animal, you were breaking the law. It was a legal requirement. And it's changed to become a status indicator to show that you love animals and that you love the environment. And the more money and prestige you can put into that, it's a kind of virtue signaling in a way, but it's a very sort of positive one. So there is something else in the novel, which is Mercerism, the secular religion, which is accessed through a virtual reality construct. People have a thing in the corner of their Conapt called a empathy box. And they stand on it. I always imagine it's like one of the old weighing machines. You stand onto a platform, grab hold of two handles, and you're projected into this virtual reality, which is usually a very steep mountain, which the prophet Wilbur Mercer is ascending. And he's like an old sort of grizzled man, and unseen assailants are throwing rocks at him. And Mercer reveres certain animals. The donkey is important to him, and of course the donkey is full of Christian symbolism. And the toad is another favourite one, and owls are also mentioned. And of course Philip K. Dick was going to write a book before he died called The Owl in Daylight, which was never written. So there's another example of a theme recurring there. So in a way, Mercerism is another way that people atone for their guilt of the destruction of the environment through nuclear war. So in lots of ways, Androids is an environmental text. in as much as Ursula Le Guin's word for world is forest is. It's very environmental text. So Deckard has to get up, face work. He has the status anxiety because he only has an electric sheep, not a real sheep. And he has to cope with Iran's abuse, and they bicker. And it's very, very realistic. And you feel sympathy for both of them because Iran has programmed a 6-hour self-accusatory depression into the mood organ. And of course, the mood organ is supposed to be to make you feel better. But people learn to abuse means of accessing different means of consciousness as well as use them. It's very easy as a man to feel a certain sort of animus towards Iran because she does just appear to be the typical sort of nagging housewife, which is something that men will identify with. And of course, women will identify the fact that the men often are not listening to them or don't appear to be. But it's interesting, even her name, Iran, is interesting because it suggests an antagonist from another culture, that the divide between men and women are different countries and that the twain doesn't meet, even though Iran was quite different then to what it became. We see this beginning with this scene of such intense realism that Dick is instantly lifted above the manifest destiny cliches of Golden Age and hard SF, as I said. And while we naturally focus on Deckard across a working day, because the novel takes place over a single day, it's Iran who really grounds the narrative and shows us Dick's true attitude towards women. Deckard becomes charged with bounty hunting 6 androids, and in the course of a nightmarishly twisted day, he retires all of them. He kills all of them. Now, it is interesting because, of course, if you watch the film, there is this thing about a number of Nexus 6 are mentioned, how many are killed, and it's worth double checking this when you read the novel. And he is charged with killing 6, and he does, and that's Polyakov, Garland, Luft, Pris Stratton, Roy and Irma Beatty. That's interesting, 3 males and 3 females, so that's kind of balanced, the yin and yang thing. But they're machines, they're not people. They can't reproduce. Even if they could, their offspring would not survive because the androids have no empathy. They would die, the children would die. So at one point, Deckard sleeps with Rachel Rosen, another android, who's from the organization that creates the Nexus 6. And she is put in as a plant at some point to see whether he can tell if somebody is human or not with the Voight-Kamp empathy test. And she's a machine, you know, and this is sort of metaphor in a way for the love that an off-screen character who's mentioned once has for his cat. There's a scene in the book where a cat dies, and the owner of the cat says, oh, you know, my husband's going to be distraught. He never got physically close to Horace, but, you know, he really is going to be distraught. And the person at the pet shop, the pet repair shop, says, well, we can, you know, get a replica together. It'll look just like Horace and he'll never know. And of course, later on, they admit amongst themselves that he will know. So when Deckard sleeps with Rachel Rosen, it is interesting because it does bring up that thing about the fact that she is merely a sex toy, and this is approached again in a different way in Chris Beckett's Holy Machine. And it is one of Dick's things where it sort of shows how, you know, seductive a machine can be, but also how men, you know, are geared in certain ways, and is something that women struggle to understand, and sometimes men struggle to understand it as well. So there is a kind of metaphoric thing going on there. We must love something even if it's not real. So in a way, it underlines the humanity that Deckard has that Rachel doesn't have. It is that need to love is what makes us human. And Rachel, of course, responds to Rick by killing a goat which she has bought earlier that day after he retires some of the androids. Now, Rachel is a literary device. She's a mouthpiece for Dick's message about empathy, but she's been brought up by humans and treated as a human, so she can simulate human feelings up to a point. But nonetheless, Deckard catches her with the Voight-Kamp empathy test, and she is ultimately exposed. So at the end of the novel, when Rick is in crisis, it is Iran, though, who comes through for him, who shows him empathy, care and love. And I don't want to talk too much about the crisis for those people who haven't read the novel, but what Rick finds is that the ersatz things don't matter as long as we know they're ersatz. And this was Philip K. Dick's quest, really, to know the unknowable, to know what was real, and to value what was real, and to be humane to what was real, and to sort of disregard the rest, and, you know, and to be careful and watch for what was out there, the killing machines that were there. So that's my take on it. So I think Dick's approach really in this book may appear on the surface to be one which shows a disregard for women, but what it really shows a disregard for is killing machines. Iran's a really underrated character. She's drawn very deftly and cleverly. We see her in different moods, and she really is the sort of hero of the piece. You know, she really is the heroine. She's a fantastic character, and she redeems Rick, and he has a really, really tough day. And there's a certain sort of old-fashionedness about the part that she stays at home and he goes out to work. But the fact is, you know, he delivers the goods. He brings home the money, which will raise the Deckard status and also confirm their empathy and give them a new animal to love, or at least that's the hope. But unfortunately, Rachel's actions with the goat put a stop to that. But there is something else, you know, the ersatz comes back in their lives, but they know what it is. They know it's not real. So there's some thoughts on androids. I do want to do more on it at some point. I'm going to do a lot more detail about other aspects of the novel. But that's what came out of that conversation, thinking about how it's too easy for all of us to fall into reaction posture. If you have an alternative view of what actually happens in the book and what Dick's attitude to women is displayed through the book, I'd love to hear about it. Of course, we're just talking about this book now, not his whole life and the rest of his oeuvre, just this book. But to me, I think he really puts Iran on a pedestal and shows how important she is. And, you know, she is the domestic stay-at-home heroine of Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep. Hope you've enjoyed that. Thanks for watching. Thanks for your memberships. Do check the backlist here if you're new to the channel. And I'll see you again soon on the main body of the channel. Bye for now.